Welcome to the deep dive. We are universally taught this idea that the ultimate measure of true love is basically what you are willing to endure for it.
Oh, absolutely. The whole endurance test.
Right. From the folklore we absorb as kids to the movies we watch as adults, the message is just remarkably consistent. It tells you that if you really love someone, there is no weight limit.
Yeah, you were supposed to just hold them through their lies, through their betrayal, through their absolute chaos.
Exactly. But today, we are looking at a piece of writing that takes that exact type of limitless loyalty and calls it something else entirely. It calls it a profound insult to your own humanity.
Which is just a bracing place to start, isn't it?
It really is.
Because it immediately puts you, the listener, on the defensive. I mean, we all want to believe we are capable of this heroic cinematic level of devotion.
We do. We are conditioned to view endurance as the ultimate romantic virtue. But today, we are looking at a very concise, incredibly dense text by Andre Houston titled Loving in Spite of.
It is a phenomenal piece.
It really is. And the mission for our deep dive today is to completely deconstruct this romanticized idea of loving someone no matter what.
Unpacking the myth, essentially.
Yes, exactly. We are going to look under the hood of human psychology to understand the difference between healthy devotion and, well, absolute self-destruction.
And Houston opens with a provocation that is just, it really sets the tone.
It caught my attention immediately. He argues that if you strip away the romanticism and look at the harsh reality of human nature, the list of people you can truly love, in spite of their actions, is incredibly short.
Extremely short. I mean, he hypothesizes that biologically and socially, that list probably only extends to your children,
Right.
maybe your spouse or your parents.
And even then, he puts a massive asterisk next to that list.
Oh, a huge asterisk, because Houston makes it clear that even within those tight blood ties or life partnerships, circumstances dictate absolutely everything.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I was thinking about this in terms of financial credit.
Okay, I like that. Walk me through it.
We are constantly handed this cultural narrative that love is essentially an unlimited credit card. You hand it to your partner or your family member, and the expectation is that no matter how much emotional debt they rack up, the card should never decline.
Right, no matter how many times they completely overdraft the account with terrible behavior.
Exactly. And if it declines, the culture says your love wasn't real. But Houston is arguing that every healthy, functioning relationship actually has to have a strict credit limit.
Because without a credit limit, you are no longer operating a partnership.
Right.
You are running a crisis center that is completely bankrupting your own psychological reserves.
That makes sense. But I do want to pause on Houston's use of the word insult here.
The insult to your humanity part.
Yeah. He specifically argues that loving someone in spite of massive betrayals like chronic lies or infidelity is an insult to who you are as a human being.
Yeah.
And I have to push back on that a little bit.
Go for it.
Because it completely flips the cultural script on forgiveness. I mean, is it really an insult to our humanity to endure a betrayal and choose to stay?
It is a tough pill to swallow.
Right. Couldn't someone argue that staying is just what a profoundly forgiving, highly evolved person looks like?
Well, it is the intuitive counter-argument, but we have to look closely at the operational mechanics of what enduring that kind of betrayal actually does to the human brain.
Okay, so what does it do?
The insult Houston is talking about isn't about the moral act of forgiving. It is about the psychological degradation of your own self-respect.
Ah, I see.
When you choose to stay in a dynamic where you are actively and repeatedly receiving lies or infidelity, and you justify it by saying, my love is just that strong.
You are telling yourself a story.
Yes.
Yeah.
You are programming a very dangerous feedback loop into your subconscious.
What does that feedback loop look like in real time, though?
So, your brain constantly monitors your environment to establish a baseline of what you deserve. If you endure a partner's chronic lying without consequence, your actions are sending a clear, undeniable signal to your own nervous system.
Like a structural update to your brain.
Exactly. You are signaling, my dignity is worth less than keeping this person in the room. You are telling your subconscious mind that you deserve to be lied to.
Oh, wow. That is intense.
Houston is pointing out a massive cognitive distortion in our society. We conflate suffering with depth. We think the more pain a relationship causes us, the more real the love must be.
Because we survived the fire together.
Right. But Houston is demanding we separate the two. Humanity and dignity require a baseline of respect. Waiving that requirement isn't evolution, it is self-erasure.
That is a very unsettling thought. It essentially means our subconscious is keeping a real-time tally of our self-worth based entirely on what we allow others to get away with.
100%.
We think we are just turning a blind eye to save the relationship, but we are actually recalibrating our own internal value down to zero.
Exactly. Which establishes the foundational premise we have to keep in mind for this entire deep dive. The capacity for healthy love is completely conditional upon mutual respect.
And the moment respect vanishes.
The love stops being a bond and becomes a trap.
But if that is the case, like if love shouldn't endure everything, and if there absolutely has to be a strict credit limit, how do we actually measure that in practice?
It is tricky because the line is blurry.
It is incredibly difficult. How do you distinguish between being a loyal, supportive partner who is helping someone through a dark time and just being completely self-destructive?
Well, this is where Houston introduces a concept that addresses that exact confusion. He draws a hard, definitive line between unconditional love and enabling.
And he defines it so sharply. He writes, unconditional love accepts the person, but enabling accepts the behavior.
Yes. And I want you, the listener, to really interrogate that sentence. Think about the most difficult relationship in your life right now.
We all have at least one.
Exactly. Ask yourself, are you accepting the flawed human being, or are you underwriting their destructive choices? Because Houston warns us about operating under what he calls the guise of loyalty.
Right, because we think we are being the ultimate loyal friend or partner. We take pride in being the one person standing by them when everyone else got fed up and walked away.
We wear it like a badge of honor. But look at the mechanism of what is actually happening. When you allow harmful actions to persist without consequence, you are no longer loving the individual.
You're participating in it.
You have become an active participant in their stagnation. You are the structural safety net that prevents them from hitting the rock bottom they desperately need to hit in order to trigger real behavioral change.
So we act as the shock absorbers for their terrible decisions.
Precisely. If they overspend, you cover the rent. If they drink too much and insult someone, you apologize for them the next morning.
You are entirely buffering them from the friction of reality.
And without that friction, they will never ever grow. So you have to ask yourself, is keeping them comfortable the same thing as loving them? Houston argues it is the exact opposite.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because why do we do this? Why is the human drive to enable so overwhelmingly strong?
Fear, usually.
Right. If I am looking at the psychology of it, we usually enable because we are terrified of abandonment. We think, if I stop being the shock absorber, if I let them feel the consequences, the relationship will fracture.
So we tolerate the intolerable strictly as a preservation tactic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Houston points out the absolute paradox of this strategy. Ironically, trying to save a relationship through limitless tolerance actually guarantees its failure.
Yes. And he specifically notes that it guarantees failure through what he calls our own eventual resentment.
And we need to talk about resentment because resentment is so insidious.
We need to understand what it actually is on a physiological level. It is not just a bad mood.
No, not at all.
Resentment is unexpressed anger that your body is storing as chronic stress. You cannot endlessly absorb someone else's toxic behavior or irresponsibility without your nervous system keeping the score.
Every time you swallow your anger to, keep the peace.
You are depositing a layer of resentment into the foundation of the relationship.
So you think you are sacrificing your anger to save the bond, but you are just quietly poisoning the well.
Exactly. Resentment is the absolute death knell of intimacy. You might physically stay in the same house, you might share a bank account.
But the relationship itself is dead.
It has devolved into a shared toxicity. True love actually requires accountability. Accountability is the immune system of a relationship. Without it, the bond simply rots from the inside out.
This requires a massive paradigm shift. Culturally, we are taught that accountability is cold, that demanding better behavior from a partner is somehow transactional or conditional.
But Houston's framework suggests otherwise.
Right. It suggests that true love looks at someone and says, you are fundamentally better than this behavior. I love you too much to watch you destroy yourself. And importantly, I respect myself too much to be collateral damage.
That is the crucial pivot. And you, listening, really need to examine your own history with this. Where have you confused loyalty with enabling?
Where have you patted yourself on the back for being a ride or die partner?
When in reality, you are just shielding someone from the necessary consequences of their own actions.
It is incredibly confronting. Because when you participate in that shared toxicity, The damage doesn't stay contained to the relationship. It actively begins to dismantle the individual who is doing the enabling.
It seeps into everything.
It does. And Houston describes this consequence using this evocative, almost chilling metaphor. He calls it the heavy shroud.
Yes. He observes that constantly choosing another person's comfort over your own peace takes a severe, quantifiable toll on your identity.
He writes about how this dynamic creates a subconscious narrative that your needs are entirely secondary. And if you think about it, identity is largely built on our preferences and our boundaries.
Our sense of self.
Right. But if you are spending every day adjusting your mood so the other person doesn't get upset, or constantly anticipating their triggers so you can manage their reactions,
You are engaging in daily micro-erasures of yourself.
you learn to suppress your own voice so thoroughly that eventually you literally forget how to speak.
It is the psychology of identity pruning. The brain is highly efficient. If you start using the neural pathways associated with your own desires, your preferences, and your self-advocacy, those pathways weaken.
Wow. So you literally lose yourself on a neurological level.
Over time, yes, the spite of becomes this heavy shroud. It physically feels like a weight. You become a shadow functioning entirely to serve the neuroses of the other person.
Houston notes the immense danger in wondering, where the boundary of your identity ends and the other person's chaos begins.
That blurring of the lines is so dangerous.
I read an analogy recently from a listener that completely nailed the mechanism of this. They compared this dynamic to being in a dual-control car, like the kind they use for driver's education.
Oh, that is a great visual. Let's explore that mechanism.
Okay, so imagine your partner is in the driver's seat, and their chaos, their unmanaged trauma, or their toxic behavior means they're constantly slamming their foot on the gas and heading straight for a cliff.
Okay.
Because you love them, you don't get out of the car. Instead, you sit in the passenger seat with your own set of dual controls, and you are constantly, exhaustingly riding the brake to keep you both alive.
Because you think your unconditional love is teaching them how to drive safely.
Yes, but you aren't teaching them anything. They're still flooring the gas. All you are doing is burning out your own brake pads until the car eventually crashes anyway.
That is an exceptionally accurate representation of trauma bonding and investment. You believe that your effort, your braking, will somehow cure their desire to accelerate toward the cliff.
But it doesn't.
It never does. You don't cure their chaos with your peace. You just become exhausted, anxious, and entirely depleted. You are wearing the heavy shroud.
Or another way to look at it, like two bodies of water mixing. If one is polluted, which is their chaos, and you are the clean water, your peace doesn't purify it.
You just become contaminated yourself.
Exactly. So if the danger is the mixing of your identity with another's chaos, the only logical solution is to build a dam or, take your foot off the brake and get out of the car.
Which is much easier said than done.
Right. Because the moment you try to stop that identity erosion, the moment you decide to let them steer their own life, you hit a massive psychological wall.
Guilt. The guilt is overwhelming for most people.
Why is it that the exact moment we take a step to protect our own mental health, we are plagued with guilt? Like admitting our capacity has a limit is somehow a failure.
This brings us to Huster's redefinition of boundaries. And to answer your question, we have to look at how human beings are socialized, particularly those who identify as empaths or caregivers.
Okay, how so?
From a very early evolutionary standpoint, our survival depended on our utility to the tribe. If you were selfish, you were cast out and you died.
So we are hardwired to be useful.
Fast forward to modern relationships, and many of us are still operating on a version of this software. We believe our primary value comes from our utility to others.
So when we set a boundary, when we finally say, no, I won't accept being spoken to this way, or I will not cover your debts anymore, we are temporarily halting our utility to that person.
Exactly. And your primal brain interprets that halt in utility as a threat to the relationship itself. You feel overwhelming guilt because you are confusing being a good partner with having absolutely no limits.
We think a boundary is an act of aggression.
But Houston uses the text to fundamentally dismantle that guilt. He argues that a boundary is not an ending. It is not a weapon you wield against someone.
No, he calls a boundary a guardrail for the heart, intended to prevent the love from becoming a source of destruction.
Think about the operational logic of a guardrail on a treacherous mountain pass. Right. The guardrail isn't there to stop you from driving on the mountain. It isn't there to ruin the road trip. It is specifically placed at the most dangerous curves to ensure the car doesn't plummet into the ravine.
It exists solely to allow the journey to continue safely.
Yes.
That completely reorients how I have been thinking about this. A boundary isn't a wall to keep the person out. It is an architectural support to keep the relationship standing.
That is exactly what it is.
For example, saying, I love you, but I will not engage in a conversation with you when you are screaming at me. You aren't ending the love. You are putting a guardrail on the communication to prevent the love from being destroyed by the chaos of their anger.
And this is how you, the listener, must begin to view your own boundaries. They are the survival manual for your connections.
If you want the bridge of your relationship to endure, you cannot let it collapse under the weight of unhealthy behaviors.
The boundary is the structural beam that says, we can connect here, but we cannot cross this line. Because if we do, the entire structure fails.
But, okay, setting a guardrail implies that you have already identified a dangerous cliff.
Usually, yeah.
Right. Usually, we only set a boundary after a severe hurt has already occurred. We realize we need the guardrail because we almost went over the edge.
Which means there is already trauma there.
Exactly. So, a significant betrayal or hurt is sitting there right in the middle of the relationship. How do you process that past hurt while trying to maintain this newly built boundary?
Well, this introduces us to the complex mechanics of forgiveness versus reconciliation. Houston introduces a profound differentiation here. And honestly, it is perhaps the most liberating concept in the entire text.
I completely agree.
He states that forgiveness is strictly an internal release, while reconciliation is a joint venture.
The clarity of dividing those two concepts is just staggering because our culture works incredibly hard to smash those two words together.
It's the whole forgive and forget narrative.
Right. The implication is that if you don't invite the person who hurt you back to the Thanksgiving table, you haven't truly forgiven them. You're just holding a grudge.
Which is incredibly manipulative.
It is. But Houston completely severs the tie between forgiving someone and granting them access to your life. I like to think about this in terms of a landlord with a destructive tenant.
Walk us through the mechanics of that analogy, because it is brilliant.
Okay, so imagine you are a landlord and you have a tenant who completely trashed your property and stopped paying rent.
Nightmare scenario.
Total nightmare. The anger, the resentment, and the stress of trying to collect that debt is ruining your life. Your blood pressure is up. You aren't sleeping. Finally, you realize the pursuit of justice is literally killing you.
So what do you do?
You decide to just forgive the debt. You wipe the ledger clean. You tell them, you owe me nothing. Go in peace. That is the act of forgiveness. You release the debt entirely for your own sanity.
And here is the operational mechanism.
Right. Just because you forgave the debt does not mean you're going to hand them the keys and let them sign a new lease.
Because that would be structurally absurd. You would be inviting the exact same destruction back into your property.
Exactly. You can forgive the debt with complete sincerity while simultaneously refusing to reconcile the business relationship.
That is exactly the distinction Houston is making. He defines forgiveness as a way to let go of the poison of bitterness for your own sake. It has absolutely nothing to do with the perpetrator.
It is an internal job.
There is a famous saying in psychology that bitterness is a poison you drink hoping the other person dies.
Yeah.
It floods your body with cortisol. It keeps your nervous system in fight or flight. Forgiveness is just the act of pouring that poison down the drain so you don't have to drink it anymore.
But reconciliation, that is an entirely different process.
Completely different. Because reconciliation requires what Houston calls a demonstrable change in the other person.
Meaning, not just an apology.
Not just an apology. It is not just tears or a promise to do better next time. It requires the hard, sustained evidence of changed behavior over time. Reconciliation is a bridge that must be built from both sides.
And if they aren't actively building their side with new actions,
You cannot cross over to them.
this is incredibly empowering for you, the listener. It means you can forgive someone in spite of their actions, to free your own soul, while firmly choosing not to invite them back into the intimate spaces of your life.
You can wish them the best from a very safe, heavily guarded distance.
You maintain the boundary, but you drop the heavy shroud of bitterness.
It is the ultimate act of self-preservation.
But executing this, like being able to compartmentalize forgiveness and access, and being able to hold these firm guardrails, it requires a remarkably strong internal compass. You have to know exactly where your limits are.
Which brings the discussion to Houston's ultimate test for the viability of any relationship. Integrity.
Right. Integrity is the ultimate litmus test.
Yeah.
Houston argues that maintaining your own integrity is the definitive measure. He writes that if loving someone requires you to compromise your core values or lie to yourself about your own reality, the cost of that love is simply too high.
I am glad we are touching on this because we usually use the word integrity as a synonym for honesty.
Like telling the truth.
Right. But psychologically, it means something much deeper. If you look at the etymology, the word integrity comes from the Latin integer, which means whole, complete, or undivided.
Oh, like a whole number in math.
Exactly, the exact same root. So psychologically speaking, having integrity doesn't just mean telling the truth, it means being structurally whole. It means your morals, your values, and your actions are undivided and aligned.
So when Houston notes that any connection demanding you break yourself into pieces to fit their narrative is not built on true affection.
He means it quite literally.
Break yourself into pieces to fit their narrative.
Yeah.
It is like taking a jigsaw puzzle piece and violently cutting off its edges just so you can force it into the wrong spot on the board.
Yes. You are destroying your own wholeness to maintain the illusion that the relationship works.
I do struggle with that line, though. I want to push back on this idea of remaining totally whole and unbroken.
Yeah.
Because, every couples therapist on the planet will tell you that long-term relationships require compromise.
They do.
So if I agree to watch a movie I hate because my partner loves it, or if I agree to spend the holidays with my in-laws instead of my own family, I am bending.
Sure.
But what if my partner's preference is that I stop talking to a certain friend because it makes them insecure? Both feel like compromises in the moment. So what does this all mean for compromise? How do we objectively measure when a normal relationship compromise crosses over into fracturing the self?
It is a vital question. And the distinction lies in the psychological mechanism of what you are actually giving up. We have to separate healthy compromise from toxic compromise.
Okay, lay that out for us.
Healthy compromise bends preferences. Toxic compromise fractures the self.
Bending preferences versus fracturing the self.
Yeah.
How does that map onto our daily decisions?
When you agree to watch the movie you hate, or go to the in-laws for the holidays, or split the chores in a way you find slightly annoying, you are bending your preferences. You are negotiating the logistics of sharing a life with another autonomous human being.
Right, your core identity is not threatened by watching a bad movie.
Exactly. But toxic compromise requires you to abandon your morals, ignore your grip on reality, or silence your intuition.
Ah, I see.
If your partner demands you cut off a platonic best friend due to their own unmanaged jealousy, or if they require you to cover up their unethical behavior at work, that is not a logistical negotiation.
That is a demand that you break a piece of your integrity off and hand it to them to soothe their anxiety.
Precisely.
So the objective measure is cognitive dissonance. If the compromise creates a deep chronic anxiety because your actions no longer align with your internal values, you aren't compromising, you are self-destructing.
You hit the nail on the head. True connection, as Houston writes, is finding a balance that honors both people. He describes it as a love soft enough to understand human frailty, but firm enough to demand respect.
Soft enough to understand frailty, but firm enough to demand respect. That is the ultimate tightrope walk. You have to have grace for their mistakes, the softness, but you have to hold the line on your integrity, the firmness.
It is the most rigorous psychological work a human being can do because it is infinitely easier to just be entirely soft and become an enabler, or entirely firm and become an isolated, unapproachable wall.
Finding that middle ground where you remain whole but deeply connected requires immense awareness.
And this delicate balance isn't a destination you arrive at once and then stop thinking about. It requires constant, active maintenance.
Which brings us to Houston's final points concerning the active nature of love and what he identifies as the single most dangerous trap in modern relationships.
The illusion of potential.
Yes, this is where Houston completely dismantles the fairy tale. He challenges the deeply ingrained romantic ideal that love is an involuntary, overwhelming emotion that just strikes you like lightning and carries you away.
Right. The language we use implies total loss of control. We fall in love, you trip over it, and boom, you are a victim to the emotion.
But Houston argues that maintaining a healthy relationship is a daily, active decision. It is a conscious choice, not just a passive feeling.
And thank God for that, because human feelings are inherently unstable.
Oh, totally. You might wake up on a Tuesday, you are stressed about a deadline at work, the dog threw up on the rug, your partner left their dirty dishes on the counter, and you feel absolutely zero overwhelming romantic emotion for them.
Exactly. If love is purely an involuntary feeling, your relationship is in an existential crisis every single Tuesday.
Right. Shifting your mindset from waiting on fleeting feelings to consciously choosing the relationship takes love out of the realm of magic and brings it into the realm of practical reality.
You choose to act with love even when you are annoyed. You choose to maintain the guardrails. You choose to be accountable. Love becomes a verb, a practice, rather than just a state of being.
But making that daily choice safely requires you to be very clear-eyed about the reality of the person you're actually choosing. And this is where Houston introduces a question that I think every single person needs to ask themselves in the mirror.
It is a phenomenal question.
He asks, am I loving this person because of who they truly are or because of who I want them to be?
The trap of idealization. Psychologically speaking, this is perhaps the greatest source of preventable suffering in human relationships.
Why does the human brain do this, though? Why do we prefer the illusion of potential over the reality standing right in front of us? We will fall in love with the 10% of the time they are amazing, charming, and attentive, and we will actively project the 10% over the 90% of the time they're treating us with indifference or cruelty.
It comes down to a psychological mechanism called intermittent reinforcement. It is the exact same mechanism that makes gambling addictive.
Okay, like a slot machine.
Yes, if a slot machine paid out every time, it would be boring. If it never paid out, you would walk away. But because it pays out unpredictably, just often enough to give you a hit of dopamine, you stay tethered to the machine, endlessly pulling the lever, hoping for the jackpot.
And we do the exact same thing with toxic partners.
We do. When they give us that 10% of amazing behavior, our brain floods with dopamine. We think, there is the real them, the jackpot. And then when they revert to the 90% bad behavior, we endure it because we are hooked on the memory of the payout.
We are clinging to the idealized projection of what we know they could be.
And if we connect this back to the enabling from the beginning of our deep dive, this is exactly the engine behind why we enable.
That makes so much sense. We enable because we are fiercely loyal to the potential of the person, not the reality of their actions. We think if I just buffer them enough, if I just love them hard enough, they will permanently become that 10% version of themselves.
But potential is a ghost. You are paying the emotional rent for a ghost. You cannot build a relationship with potential. You can only build a secure relationship with the concrete actions a person is demonstrating in the present moment.
And the sunk cost fallacy plays a huge role here too, right?
Oh, absolutely. We think I've invested so much time trying to unlock their potential, I can't walk away now.
But fighting reality is a battle you will lose 100% of the time, because reality always wins. Houston leaves us with a stark, single-sentence final warning in a text to combat this exact trap. He writes, "Do not allow your loyalty to be leveraged as a tool for others to exploit."
It is a phenomenal closing thought. Loyalty is a high virtue. But in the hands of a partner who lacks accountability, your beautiful, unconditional loyalty is just a weapon they use to keep you compliant in their chaos.
So, as we synthesize this massive architectural shift in how we view relationships, we have completely deconstructed the myth of loving in spite of. We started by realizing that there are hard, necessary limits to what a human soul can endure without degrading its own self-respect.
We untangled the deeply confusing knot of unconditional love versus enabling. Understanding that true love requires the friction of accountability, and that shielding someone from consequences guarantees the death of the relationship through resentment.
We looked at the mechanics of the heavy shroud and how riding the brake in the passenger seat of someone else's chaos literally prunes away your own identity.
We reframed the guilt of setting boundaries. Guardrails are not betrayals, they are the necessary architectural supports that prevent the connection from plummeting off a cliff.
And we separated the internal, physical release of forgiveness from the hard, evidence-based joint venture of reconciliation.
And finally, we grounded the concept of love in the daily, active practice of maintaining integrity, demanding that we remain whole and that we love the messy reality of the person in front of us, rather than pulling the lever on the slot machine of their potential.
So to you, the listener, as you navigate the incredibly complex reality of trying to stay whole while standing side by side with another human being, we want to remind you of this.
Prioritizing your own self-preservation is not a failure of empathy. You cannot pour water from an empty cup, and you cannot build a healthy bridge on crumbling foundations. True connection requires both a soft heart and a spine of absolute steel.
We began this deep dive by talking about the cultural expectation of limitless endurance. But if true integrity means remaining whole, an unbroken integer, consider this thought as you go about your week. How much of your current emotional exhaustion isn't actually coming from loving someone too much, but from the relentless daily work of sweeping up the broken pieces of your own boundaries. What would happen if, starting tomorrow, you chose to direct that fierce, unconditional loyalty you have been pouring into everyone else's potential toward your own peace of mind?